I'll be wrapping up the night with Dr. Yasir Qadhi, Hafidhahullah. He joined East Plano Islamic Center, aka EPIC, as a resident scholar in July of 2019, completed his primary and secondary education in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He graduated with a BSc in chemical engineering from the University of Houston, after which he was accepted as a student in the Islamic University of Medina. There he completed a second bachelor's degree specializing in hadith studies and went on to complete his master's in Islamic theology from the College of Da'wah, then returned to the US and completed a PhD in religious studies from Yale. He has authored several books, published academic articles, appeared in numerous satellite and TV stations. My personal favorite series of his is the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And we welcome you to this year's knowledge retreat. Barakallahu feek. Did you want to stand or sit? It's up to you. You want to sit? Well, one at a time, but yeah, go ahead.
You can get some water as well.
Of course.
Okay, sorry. This one or this one?
Both. This is for the video. So it's not going to make any sound, just that one. That's...
Okay. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala amma ba'd. So today, inshallah, we have actually a lengthy class. And I've been told we have around 2 hours with a break in the middle. And the two topics are kind of related to one another. When I looked at the topics and I understood the reality of the knowledge retreat, I have slightly modified, because the topics themselves are quite technical and they require prerequisite knowledge. So I thought rather than get involved in technicalities, which is more befitting of advanced studies, I would actually do something that is, inshallah, I hope inshallah ta'ala, of more practical benefit. I hope that inshallah within these 2 hours you will actually be better equipped to understand the realities of what we're talking about in a way that inshallah will, quite frankly, inshallah, be of immediate benefit for the rest of your lives. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off with the bird's eye view of some of the sciences you should all be familiar with. We're going to get to the topics of fiqh and minority situations, don't worry. But I want to give you the bird's eye view of why there is this controversy, why there are tensions between various strands, various scholars, various philosophies of fiqh. For me personally, I feel it's more beneficial to empower you in understanding the causes of diversity, so that you're better equipped to then make your own choices. Who exactly, are you going to trust? Who exactly are going to follow in this regard? So let us begin by introducing you to 4 sciences. Now, to be honest, I apologize. I haven't looked at your schedules and your coursework before. So if you've done some of this stuff, I do apologize. If you haven't, well, then that's perfect. And even if you have a little bit of refresher, is nice. So this is a pen and paper class, I'm told. So I do expect you to be taking notes. This is, inshallah, deep stuff we're going to be doing relatively quick. I do apologize, but I was told there's no PowerPoint or there's no mechanism to write it down. So you're going to have to make the best of it, inshallah ta'ala. So let's begin by defining 4 crucial sciences, maybe even a 5th if we have time. 4 crucial sciences. The first of them is the science of fiqh. The second, the science of usul al-fiqh. The third, the science of qawa'id al-fiqh. And the fourth, the science of maqasid al-fiqh, maqasid al-shara'. Don't worry, I'm going to go over them one by one. Number 1, fiqh. Number 2, usul al-fiqh. Number 3, qawa'id al-fiqh. And number 4, maqasid al-shara'. When you understand these 4, it's going to start equipping you to understand why there are differences in the way scholars approach reality and rulings. So, fiqh is the one that you all know. What is halal, what is haram. What is the definition of fiqh? The definition of fiqh is the detailed knowledge of specific Islamic rulings, the detailed knowledge of specific Islamic rulings on actions as derived from its religious evidences. I'll repeat. Fiqh is the detailed knowledge. By detail, therefore, fiqh goes over every single aspect. It's not generic. It's not like tarbiyah. It's not like don't get angry. It's not generic talk. It is detailed knowledge of every single aspect of specific Islamic rulings. So once again, we're not talking about don't get angry. We're not talking about, zina is haram. These are generic. Specifically, can you do X, Y, and Z? So it is detailed knowledge of specific Islamic rulings on actions. Fiqh deals with actions. Fiqh does not deal with philosophy. Fiqh does not deal with theology. Fiqh does not deal with tazkiyah. Fiqh deals with the outer. Fiqh deals with physical, tangible actions. So, fiqh is the detailed knowledge of specific Islamic rulings on actions as derived from its religious evidences. So we derive the detailed knowledge of Islamic rulings, specific rulings. We derive that knowledge from its religious evidences. So we're not worried about what the law says when we talk about fiqh, right? That's another question. That's a separate question. When we say, what does fiqh say? We're not interested in American constitutional law. We're worried about, we're asking about Islamic law. We're asking about religious evidences. So this is what fiqh is. Detailed knowledge of specific Islamic rulings on actions as derived from its religious evidences. We all know overall that fiqh is something we ask about all the time. You study it, you ask questions about it. Fiqh is divided into many chapters. There are many madhabs of fiqh. Generally speaking, fiqh can be divided into two broad categories. The first is ibadat and the second is mu'amalat. Ibadat are the rituals, mu'amalat are the interactions with other people. And the ibadat are the 5 arkan, along with the things that are related to them. So tahara is not a direct rukun, but it is ibadat, right? The rukun is salah, but you need tahara for salah. So tahara comes under ibadat. So ibadat are the rituals. Ibadat are the actual acts of worship. And then mu'amalat, and mu'amalat is how we deal with other people. So mu'amalat is buying and selling. Mu'amalat is marriage and divorce. Mu'amalat is what we wear and eat. Mu'amalat is interacting. So that's mu'amalat. And the two have differences in the basic premises, which again, today's not the topic to get into all of that, but you should be aware of this. So that's what fiqh is. Quickly move on. We're done with fiqh, because we have to give you the bird's eye view of all of these sciences. What is usul al-fiqh? Usul al-fiqh, again, this is being very simplistic because this is not a super advanced class, so inshallah, what I'm saying is not wrong. What I'm saying is also not the pure academic terminologies that you might learn if you were studying at 5 years of madrasa. But this is the point of teaching you. Usul al-fiqh is, the definition of usul al-fiqh is the methodology of extracting fiqh, full stop, that's it. The methodology of extracting fiqh. I define what fiqh is. Usul al-fiqh, how do we get to fiqh? What do we do to do fiqh? How is fiqh derived? So, usul al-fiqh deals with what are the sources of fiqh? Because in our definition of fiqh, we said that it is detailed rulings derived from its religious evidences. Okay, well, what are the evidences for fiqh? That's usul al-fiqh. And here's, once again, you have a whole variety of interpretations because, as you're aware, there are multiple schools of Islamic law. And we are familiar with 4 of them. Historically, there were closer to 10, 15. These 4 are kind of a fluke of accident of history. In reality, we had plenty of other madahib and other scholars, and there have always been scholars outside of the madahib. So each of these madahib has its own usul al-fiqh. Because it has its own usul al-fiqh, understandably, its fiqh is going to be different. Think of usul al-fiqh like a juicer, and fiqh is the juice, right? So depending on the juicer, depending on the power, depending on the whirling of the blades, depending on what you put in, the output's going to be different. So that's what usul al-fiqh is. Usul al-fiqh is the methodology of extracting fiqh. Usul al-fiqh deals with a whole bunch of questions. Most importantly, what are the sources of fiqh? Now, the average Muslim says, what do you mean? That's pretty self-evident. Well, actually, no, it's not. The Quran and Sunnah is, of course, for us as Sunnis, pause here, footnote, the whole class is based on the Sunni paradigm. You understand, if you want to go even deeper, you have non-Sunnis that have completely different epistemologies. We're not getting there for today's class, except at the end I'm going to mention some things that are relevant. But from our perspective as Sunni Muslims, Quran and Sunnah is obviously the given. Everybody understands that. But it's not that simplistic. Because I don't want to get too technical, but what types of Sunnah? Because Sunnah is a bit more convoluted than the Quran. Also, what about after the Quran and Sunnah? What are the sources after the Quran and Sunnah? Imam Malik famously said, for me, what the people of Medina do is a source of fiqh. the people of Medina, that I found them doing something becomes Islamic law. That was his philosophy. That was his usul al-fiqh. Imam Abu Hanifa said, for me, an analogy that is deductive reasoning that makes sense is stronger than some versions of hadith. Some versions of hadith, I'm going to be more skeptical. If I find something that is analogically sound, right? If X then Y, if Y then Z, then I'm going to follow Z if the Quran says X. I'm being very simplistic here. For Abu Hanifa, a syllogism, for Abu Hanifa, a logical reasoning was more sound to him than certain aspects of the Sunnah. This is where we get to the sources. For Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, a da'if hadith, a weak hadith, is more sound than a logical reasoning. So again, you have this diversity. What are the sources? These are the simple ones. Then you get more advanced ones. Qiyas, istihsan, urf. All of these we're not going to get into, but that's what usul al-fiqh discusses. So what are the sources? Okay, that's one question of usul al-fiqh. Another question of usul al-fiqh. How does one understand the sources? The Quran is the source. Everybody agrees. Understanding the Quran is not that easy. What does the word mean? When does the Quran imply obligation? What does a particular wording of the Quran mean? So how does one understand the Quran and Sunnah or the other sources? This also leads usul al-fiqh to do a deep dive in linguistics. Believe it or not, when you study usul al-fiqh, you're going to study in a lot of detail language. Why? Because everything is based on language. When Allah says do something, when Allah says Allah loves something, when Allah says Allah hates something, what is the legal ruling of Allah saying doing something? Does it become wajib? Does it become mustahab? Does it become mubah? What does it mean? So that's where usul al-fiqh gets into language. A lot of usul al-fiqh deals with types of words, types of nouns, types of adjectives. It deals with derivation from the word to the ruling, right? If X word is used, does it imply Y or does it imply Z? That's what usul al-fiqh discusses, the role of language. Another issue usul al-fiqh discusses is, and this is one of the biggest areas of difference and divergence between the schools, what to do when it appears two evidences are in conflict with one another. What do you do when evidence X appears to say something, evidence Y appears to say something else? How do you reconcile between differing evidences? A lot of usul al-fiqh is spent on this. One hadith says one thing, another hadith says another. How do we reconcile? So how to resolve areas of conflict between evidences that actually exist. And then one other area of usul al-fiqh, how do you go from a known scenario that is mentioned in the sources to an unknown modern reality that is not mentioned in the sources? In other words, how do you extrapolate from the known to the unknown, from the given to the not-given, basically from that which is explicitly mentioned to that which we don't have precedence for? So what is the hermeneutics? What is the extrication from a past precedent to a modern reality? That's of course one of the main goals of usul al-fiqh, which is to derive a ruling for things beyond. So obviously much of fiqh, much of especially the ibadat, it's like a kind of sort of closed setting. Like for example, what is the way to pray? What breaks the wudu? These are things you go back to the past, you'll find them. Okay, now you get to modern issues. What do we do with organ transplant? I can't quote you a hadith, can I, about organ transplant? You have to go to the past, extrapolate through a hermeneutics called usul al-fiqh, and then apply to a modern scenario. The hermeneutics, the tools they're going to use to get from the known to the unknown, that's what usul al-fiqh is. And depending on your usul al-fiqh, you're obviously going to get to different rulings, okay? So that's what usul al-fiqh is. So we talked about fiqh, we talked about usul al-fiqh. Another thing you should know, and again, for those that came late, I'm quickly doing a crash course summary of sciences you should be aware of. By the way, if you were to study in a seminary, I'm doing this in 5 minutes. You're going to spend 5 years studying these courses. I spent 10 years, never studied all of fiqh, i.e. I kept on studying, kept on studying, kept on studying. You never stop studying fiqh, right? For 10 years I was at the University of Medina, and I kept on studying fiqh from beginning to end, because when you finish one book, you start another. When you finish one madhab, you start another. When you finish one madhab, you just keep on doing it continuously. You never stop. The same goes for usul al-fiqh. You just keep on doing, you keep on going, you keep on rehashing. There is no end to these sciences. You can do a PhD in any one of these sciences and specialize in a small sub-area, as many of my peers and colleagues have done. My own PhD is in Aqidah or theology, but you can't become or study in an Islamic seminary without studying all of these sciences in a lot of detail. So understand this point. I'm just giving you the bird's eye view. So we talked about fiqh, we talked about usul al-fiqh. Another science you should be aware of is qawa'id al-fiqh. Qawa'id al-fiqh. Qawa'id al-fiqh are the maxims of fiqh. The maxims of fiqh. And the maxims of fiqh are exactly that. They are specific rules. Qawa'id. Qawa'id means ruling. Specific rules, overarching principles that you can use and are helpful. So, pause here. Qawa'id al-fiqh and usul al-fiqh, there's a little bit of overlap, but they're also two separate sciences, okay? So if you kind of get confused, it's okay. Everybody, even the average student of knowledge, will not be able to academically, trust me on this, will not be able to academically defend why are they two separate sciences. But they are two separate sciences, and I'll explain why, conceptually. The problem is all of these talks require prerequisite knowledge, and you have to go to deep. Every science is interconnected, and so you have to know something to talk about other sciences. But very simplistically, usul al-fiqh, you need to know it before you derive fiqh. Usul al-fiqh, you need to use it before the fiqh ruling. The maxims of fiqh are scholars looking at all of these derived rulings and then seeing a pattern. Seeing a rule. Oh, okay, I see. If we look at all of these rulings of fiqh, we can see a commonality. And so you derive a maxim based upon the fiqh that has been derived from usul. See, a bit of a circularity. And qawa'id al-fiqh, as we said, are overarching principles that can be used to make generic statements about all of Islamic law or about sub-chapters of Islamic law. So to be very simplistic, fiqh maxims, qawa'id fiqh, can be divided into two broad categories. The first of them are what are called the al-qawa'id al-kulliyya, the overarching maxims. They apply in every scenario. And the scholars say there are 5 of them. I'm going to quickly go over them very briefly so that you're aware of what they are. There are 5 qawa'id al-fiqh that are overarching. They are a part and parcel of every chapter of fiqh. The second category of qawa'id al-fiqh are specific to each chapter. So, chapter of Tahara is going to have its own qawa'id. Chapter of Salah is going to have its own qawa'id. Chapter of Zakah is going to have its own qawa'id. So the second category is chapter specific. So when you study that chapter as an advanced student, you might study first and foremost the qawa'id. Or you might study all of fiqh and then you're going to do a higher course called qawa'id, and then you're going to learn the maxims of every chapter. So let me give you very quickly the 5 qawa'id al-kulliyya, they're called. You should know this anyway. This is general Islamic knowledge. These are called the 5 al-qawa'id al-khams al-kulliyya. These are the 5 maxims of Islamic law. And I'll quickly dictate them to you. We don't have time to go a whole lecture over them, but you should be aware of them. The first of them, I'll say it in Arabic for the advanced students. Al-yaqeenu la yazulu bish-shakk. Al-yaqeenu la yazulu bish-shakk. That which is certain is not going to be negated by that which is uncertain. That which is certain is not going to be negated by that which is certain. So, if you are certain you did wudu, and you're uncertain you broke it, you follow your certainty. You remember, I did wudu an hour ago. Did I use the restroom 20 minutes or was that 2 hours ago? I'm uncertain. So in this case, al-yaqeen la yazulu bish-shakk. You will follow certainty and you will dismiss uncertainty. Okay? This is a general qa'idah. The second qa'idah, very simple, 2 words in Arabic, al-dararu yuzal. Harm is eliminated. That which is this, the Sharia aims to eliminate harm. Ad-dararu yuzal. Something which is going to harm you, kill you. You can't willingly walk into it unless it's going to save you from a bigger harm. Let's say, well, they're not killing you with this. But you cannot willingly take on a harm unless it is to avert a bigger harm. Otherwise, the default, the Sharia aims to eliminate harm, bodily harm. Ad-dararu yuzal. So again, the issue of, for example, doing tayammum when you have a wound that is festering, right? So the Sharia, and again this goes back to a hadith that a Sahabi had an open wound and he had to put water on it. The other Sahaba said, well, you're going to have to do water. You have water, tayammum. The Quran only allows it for not having water, but we have water here. So this maxim, if he knew it, he would have told the Sahabi, ad-dararu yuzal, an open wound, you can't just pour water on it, you would do tayammum over it. And that's why the Prophet taught them this. After we find it in the hadith. So the second maxim, ad-dararu yuzal, harm is eliminated. The third maxim, al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir. Al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir. Difficulty begets ease. Difficulty begets ease. The more difficult your situation, the easier the Sharia becomes for you. The more difficult your situation, the easier the Sharia becomes for you. Lots of examples for this. The most obvious one, which is Quranic. Of course, all of these maxims are derived from the Quran and Sunnah, right? Allah didn't reveal the maxims. Allah revealed fiqh. Allah revealed the Sharia. We look at the Sharia and we see commonalities, we see rules. We extrapolate those rules and we then utilize them for other scenarios. So in the Quran, the most obvious example of this is Allah mentions in multiple verses, if you're going to die and you can't have any food except a dead animal, you're going to take the dead animal, no problem. Otherwise it is haram to eat. So al-mashaqqatu tajibu at-taysir. The fourth maxim of the qawaid al-fiqhiyya is al-'adatu muhakkama. Al-'adatu muhakkama. Al-'adatu muhakkama translates as culture is going to be taken into account. Culture, your culture, al-'ada, what people are used to, what people are accustomed to. Culture is taken into account, meaning where the Sharia is silent, culture steps in. Where the Sharia is silent, culture steps in. So for example, I lived in Saudi Arabia for 10 years while I was studying there, right? And the culture over there, when you rent an apartment, the culture over there, you enter into the apartment with absolutely nothing. No fridge, no television, no air condition, not a shred of carpet. You have to put everything there. Whereas here in America, the general ruling when you rent from a landowner, the general law, the general urf is that there will be air conditioning, right? No apartment's gonna be without air conditioning. There will be at least a fridge and a stove over there, even though you're not, the owner. It's gonna be there. Al-urfu muhakkam. Now, if in Saudi Arabia, when I rented my apartment, I lived in 2 or 3 apartments there. If in Saudi Arabia, I signed the contract, I walk in, I said, astaghfirullah, where's the air condition? You expect me to live in the desert without air condition? I'm gonna sue you in court because I signed the contract and I expected there to be an air condition. The landlord would have to say, what are you talking about? Al-urfu muhakkam, right? The culture of our place, everybody knows. You walk into the apartment, you bring your own air condition. Whereas in America, I would be able to sue and I would win in a court of law, right? The Sharia takes this into account. Al-urfu muhakkam. This is only where the Sharia is silent. We can't choose the same about drinking alcohol or something, for example, right? So the Sharia, where the Sharia is silent, al-urfu muhakkam. And the fifth and final qa'idah is al-umuru bimaqasidiha. Al-umuru bimaqasidiha. The actions are going to be judged by your intentions. What was intended when you signed this contract? Did you try to find a trick out? We're going to look at your overall goal in this regard. If you found a technicality, that's not valid in the Sharia. The Sharia is not based on a technicality. No, if you found a way out, for example, we're going to look at what was the overall intent of the contract. If you put one halal clause, a second halal clause, a third halal clause, but all of them together make it haram, we're not going to be technical, say, oh, every condition is halal. We're going to look at the overarching and we're going to see clearly what is intended is haram, so the contract becomes haram. And there are many examples for this. Now, as I said, there is some overlap between qawaid al-fiqh and usul al-fiqh, and one could say, even though it's not usually said, that qawaid al-fiqh is a subset of usul al-fiqh. Nonetheless, the way that the science is taught and the books that are written are 2 distinct books. So, if you were to go to a seminary, you would study usul al-fiqh as a separate class with separate books, separate genre, and you would study qawaid al-fiqh as a separate class, separate books, separate genre, separate authors. Also, understandably, both qawaid and usul al-fiqh are madhab sensitive, i.e., the usul of Hanafi fiqh is not the same as Shafi'i, which is not the same as Maliki, which is not the same as Hanbali, and the same goes for qawaid. The 5 qawaid are universal, everybody agrees. agrees. The 5 qawa'id that I mentioned, all madhahib agree. The sub-qawa'id of the chapters, they're not necessarily agreed upon. Some of them are agreed upon, some of them are not. So for example, one maxim of fiqh that is chapter specific. In the chapter of Tahara, for example, in the chapter of Tahara, one of the maxims is Al-aslu fil miyah at-tahara. The default of water is purity. You come across, you're walking in the desert, or you hike, or you're doing something, you come across a pool, a lake, you come across some water. The default, the water is tahir, you can do wudu from it. That's the default, okay? You don't have to ask, hey, is there any plant, sanitation plant? You don't ask, don't tell. The default, you come across a quantity of water, the default is tahir, right? Now, if you find out it is najis, that's when you find out. Until you find out, the default you'll follow, it is tahir. Now, the exact opposite when it comes to meat, for example. In the chapter of sacrifice, I'm not making this up, literally, in the Kitab al-Udhiyah, the chapter of sacrifice, the maxim that is agreed upon by all 4 schools, in fact, all of the schools of law, the default of meat is that it is not halal. It is basically najis to eat. The default of meat. If you come across meat and you don't know, slaughtered animal, you come across a slice of meat or food or whatever, the default of meat is that it is haram. You need to know that it was sacrificed in accordance to Islamic law. So there's a difference between, for example, water and between meat and others. So these are examples of the qawa'id that are specific to each chapter here, okay? So we've done fiqh, we've done usul al-fiqh, we've done qawa'id al-fiqh. Are you guys with me, or half of you are lost? That silence is not encouraging, guys. You want to talk about tazkiyah and akhlaq and go based? Up to you guys. Are you guys following? I like that. Okay, a little bit more enthusiasm. Okay, jayyid, khalas. I am going fast because we haven't even begun. This is preliminary. This is introduction. We haven't even got to the actual content, because again, they assigned me the topics, and in my humble opinion, these topics are highly technical. And what I'm giving you is actually more beneficial to understand the technical topic, as I hope inshallah you'll see at the end of this. For those that came late, again I'll go over. I'm just introducing the bird's eye view of Islamic topics that are studied in a lot of detail to understand why there is a diversity of thought. And towards the end of our seminar, we will go into more blunt detail about the reality of diversity and why there is so much diversity. Okay, we now get to the last of these. Can we just lower it a little bit because it's blocking the view? Just lower this. Oh, yeah, there we go, yeah. The last of these sciences we will do, and of course that doesn't mean it's the last of the actual sciences, there are many more sciences. The last of these sciences we're going to do is the science of maqasid al-shara' or maqasid al-fiqh. Maqasid al-fiqh is the knowledge of the goals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had intended in formulating the laws, the goals of Sharia. What does Sharia intend to achieve? So this is the philosophy of Islamic law. Why does the Sharia say what it does? This is a topic that has little to do with actual haram and halal, and more to do with overall the bird's eye view, like the whys of it. Now, for our times, this topic is super interesting, and you should be aware. This topic has had a massive resurgence. I hope to be able to explain why towards the end. If I don't, then remind me in the Q&A. Why this topic has a massive resurgence. You should be aware, this topic is not deeply studied in early and medieval Islam. This topic has a few giants. The main giant is Imam al-Shatibi from Andalus, from Muslim Spain. The main giant is Imam al-Shatibi, who wrote his book Al-Muwafaqat, and you find small discussions of it, and a little bit, in Ibn Taymiyyah, in Ibn al-Qayyim, in Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, but generally speaking, not a lot of scholars really wrote extensive books about why. And there are many reasons for this, because frankly, at the base level, we are more interested in the actual ruling than the why of the ruling. Alcohol is haram, okay, we need to know. Now, as for the whys of it, and as for the maqasid, if you know, if you don't know, it's not going to change the actual ruling, and other issues arise, which again, we don't have time to go into a lot of detail here. But khair, so the maqasid are eternal, unchanging, universal, eternal, unchanging, universal goals that apply to all societies and all peoples and permeate through every single ruling of fiqh. And these maqasid bring about a sense of justice, of nobility, of dignity, of higher calling. And the sharia, or the maqasid, sorry, can be divided into three main categories. So the maqasid have three categories. The highest level, the essential or necessary maqasid. And then you have the second level, the supporting maqasid. And then you have the third level, and this is the perfectioning maqasid. I'm going to quickly go over them very quickly, okay? So as for the necessary maqasid, the necessary maqasid, al-maqasid al-sharia, the five main maqasid al-sharia, around which the entire sharia revolves. And this is again things you should know for the basics of fiqh, the basics of why we have fiqh. The sharia intends to preserve five things in this order. Number one, the protection of religion. Number two, the protection of human life. Number three, the protection of intellect and sanity, your aql. Number four, the protection of children, progeny. And by children here we mean particularly before they are born. And number five, because protection of children that are alive goes back to number two, children, you get this point, right? So when we talk about progeny, we mean like family issues and marriage and whatnot. So number four, the protection of progeny, and number five, the protection of property and wealth. The protection of property and wealth. Once again, very quickly, hifz al-deen, number one, hifz al-deen. Number two, hifz al-nafs, to protect life. Number three, hifz al-aql, to protect the intellect. Number four, hifz al-nasl, nasl is progeny and family. And number five, hifz al-mal, the protection of wealth. And if you look at any law of the sharia, you will find its wisdom in these five things. Clearly, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated tawheed and He forbade shirk to protect religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated the salah to renew our iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated the jumu'ah to revive. So all of this, the protection of the religion. The protection of human life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade murder. Allah azza wa jalla legislated qisas, which is a life for a life. Murderers are executed. And Allah says, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاتٌ. In the qisas, which is a life for a life, in the penalty of death for the murderer, there is life for society. Allah wanted to preserve life. Okay? Number three, preservation of intellect. Allah Azza wa Jal forbade intoxicants, forbade alcohol and drugs, forbade everything that removes the sanity. So we are not allowed to take any substance that messes with our brain. So Allah Azza wa Jal forbade anything which affects our intellect and sanity. Number four, the protection of progeny. Because of this, zina has been made haram. Because of this, other things that deal with marriage, that protect the marriage, have been legislated. And number five, protection of property and wealth. Because of this, Allah forbade, for example, stealing or embezzling or defrauding or other things of this nature. So these are the five necessary goals of the Sharia. The next category, we said, is the supporting needs, the hajiyat, the supporting needs. So the Sharia has come to make life easier to live, and these are called the hajiyat. So the five, I forgot to mention the Arabic term, الضرورات الخمسة, the five necessary ضروريات, ضرورة. You must have these five for a society to flourish. So the Sharia has come to preserve these five. That's the highest level, ضروريات. The second level of maqasid, hajiyat. The third level of maqasid, takmiliyat. So we'll quickly go over them. As for the second level, hajiyat, these are the pressing needs that mankind desires, makes life bearable, but whose absence doesn't bring about destruction. It doesn't bring about death. However, it will bring about a hardship that is extremely difficult to bear, but you're not going to die. And so we try our best to avoid them. Some have defined hajiyat as those matters which are needed for the protection, establishment, and execution of the daruriyat. Those matters that are needed just around the daruriyat. Now an example of this, for example, is a place to live. If you don't have a place to live, Will you die? We have homeless people around the world. But having a place to live is a hajiyya. It's not a necessary for life and death, but it is necessary for survival, right? It's one notch less. This is a hajiyat. And then the lower level than this is kamaliyat or takmiliyat, however you want to call it. And this is basically those matters which help in the completion of the essentials, whose presence is more preferable than their absence. But you can still live you can eke out an existence. It's not the end of the world. So for example, the finer matters of purity, the proper etiquettes in eating and drinking, the minor prohibitions, not the major prohibitions in the sharia, etc., etc. Now, by the way, so these are 4 topics we did, right? Fiqh, usul al-fiqh, qawaid al-fiqh, and maqasid al-fiqh or maqasid al-sharia. You can add a 5th one very quickly, just a quick note here, so that you understand there are other sciences as well. Are you guys following or, huh? I know I'm going super fast, guys, because I haven't gotten to the beginning of the lecture yet, so we have to go over this stuff. Don't worry, it's going to get far more controversial. Don't worry, I'm here to teach, and in teaching sometimes you have to say things that are awkward. But the goal is to equip and arm you to be more prepared to face the realities of today. What was I saying? Where was I? Yeah, there's a 5th topic, and that is siyasatu sharia, Islamic politics. And siyasatu sharia is an entirely different discipline, and that is, how does an Islamic state run? What should a bona fide Khalifa do? What is he allowed to do? What is he not allowed to do? Because siyasa sharia is not the same as fiqh. And sometimes the sultan can do things that he is allowed to do, whereas technically, for example, it should not be allowed. A simple example of the past is when the Mongols invaded. Now, again, I'm going to say things that, oh boy, we're going to dig ourselves deep. So guys, I'm going to tell you something, you're going to really be confused. You're going to confuse the heck out of you. Technically, in Islamic law, there's no such thing as taxes. Technically, in Islamic law, the Khalifa does not have the right to tax the population. Okay? Just as a whole big discussion, I know, believe me. I had the same reaction 30 years ago when I first was like, wait, what, huh, how? Okay, it is what it is. Now, when the Mongols invaded, the Sultan had to tax the people because he needed to because the armies of the past were not paid. Another circularity. The armies of the past were volunteers, i.e. the people would sign up and defend themselves. That's what the Sahaba, they weren't trained armies, were they, right? What did the Sahaba do? They were businessmen, they were merchant. When they had to go fight, they fought, that they came back to their livelihoods, right? So the world changes and whatnot. So the Khalifa had to hire people. So he had to institute taxes, and he asked Imam al-Nawawi. Imam al-Nawawi said, only after you sell your personal luxury items, once you sell your 1,000, he had 1,000 slaves. The Khalifa had 1,000 slaves. And again, if you listen to my talks and library tasks and whatnot, unfortunately I don't mince my words and I teach things that are awkward. History is human. We've had a lot of negatives and positives in history. Our religion is divine. And rulers are always going to be rulers. We have to stop romanticizing and aggrandizing the past. When you study history, it's a very big eye-opener. And if you listen to my talks and whatnot, you're inshallah well aware of this reality. But nonetheless, so the Khalifa wanted to tax the people. Imam al-Nawawi said, over my dead body, basically. Who do you think you are to tax the peasants and merchants when you are a multimillionaire? First, get rid of your personal, private, looted wealth, which you shouldn't have. Sell all of the gold that your jawari wear. I'm not going to translate that word. Sell your 1,000 slaves that you have. And once you do that and you're equal like the rest of us, then I'll give you the fatwa to tax the people to fight the Mongols. So he was allowed to tax the people after certain conditions were met, for example, right? This is siyasa shar'iyya. That's a different topic than fiqh. And that is the ruling and not ruling. And again, that's a whole different topic, which again, you have entire books written. Every one of these topics is studied separately at an advanced level in a seminary, right? Every single one of these, you will take a class called Qawaid Fiqhiyya. You will take a class called Siyasa Shar'iyya, separate from Usul al-Fiqh, separate from fiqh. And this is, by the way, just within fiqh. If you wanted to do hadith, which was my speciality, you have 15 other subjects under that. If you wanted to do Aqeedah, which was my master's and the PhD, you have another 20 subjects under that, right? If you wanted to do Lugha, if you wanted to do Tariq, now you go on. Now you understand Islamic sciences is no joke. Our tradition is it is interdisciplinary. And once you truly understand this, you also understand why it is possible for a scholar to have graduated from a madrasa and be fairly familiar with one science, and frankly, at a very, very, very basic level of another science. Because they are just as separate at times as chemistry and biology, literally. So you can have a person, and I knew many such people, and there are many such people, study fiqh for 10 years and not study the basics of hadith. It's a totally separate science. And so when they talk about fiqh, they'll sound very educated, and they might make a really huge blunder about hadith because they took only the most basic course and then they moved on, right? Because it's a totally different field than the other fields. And generally speaking, I'm going into one of my infamous tangents here, so I'm gonna have to pull myself back here. Remember where I was, because I get lost myself in my tangents. Generally speaking, scholars can only specialize in one field. If you find a polymath, maybe in two, it is rare to find a scholar who is truly a scholar in multiple fields. And these are one every few hundred years or so. It's like finding a doctor who knows every single cutting-edge specialty within medicine. It doesn't happen that way. Those of you that are in med school, I know half of the class should be in med school here, right? You're all in Chicago and whatnot, so half of you guys are in med school, I know, mashallah. You understand that you can specialize in one area and forget basics, medicine 101 that you did back in USMLE step 1. Is that not correct? Oh, people of medicine, right? You can specialize in your field 20 years down the line, and then the actual medical student who's doing USMLE number 1 comes and asks you a basic question. You're like, oh, I totally forgot that. That's life. Understand the same applies to fiqh and aqeedah and scholars of Islam. When you meet your scholar, you need to know that scholar's speciality and then ask questions within his area of speciality and cut them some slack if you ask outside of their area and they give you a relatively basic answer. That's the reality, right? If I go to a pathologist with a radiology chart, the pathologist is not going to be able to answer me even a basic radiology chart. They haven't done it since, much less an advanced one. So the same applies for an Islamic scholar. You guys think if he's a madrasa graduate, khalas, he's Shaykhul Islam. No, it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, but it's got to be said to you. Put people in their places. Every single scholar you meet, without exception, has studied the basics of these sciences, really basic level. And many of them just graduate with that basic knowledge and they move on. And that's fine, because you only need that. Few of them specialize. And if they do, they'll specialize in one field. Very few specialize in more than one field. That is the reality, because Islamic scholarship is so diverse. When I went to the College of Hadith, I'll give you an example so you understand. All of this is the tangent. We haven't even begun, so we're still. When I went to the College of Hadith, I spent 4 years studying speciality of Hadith, right? Because my college was Hadith at the University of Medina, we had the College of Hadith, we had the College of Quran, we had the College of Da'wah, we had the College of Language, and we had College of Sharia. 5 colleges when I was there. Everything's changed now, it was a whole different world now. When I was there, we had 5 colleges. And for reasons I went into in other personal lectures, I chose the College of Hadith. One of the most advanced studies of Hadith in the world is done over there. Because I'm studying Hadith, I have to cut back in other sciences. So I studied 1 year of Usul al-Fiqh. I studied 1 year only. And I studied 4 years of every discipline of Hadith. In the College of Sharia, they studied 1 year of Hadith and 4 years of Usul al-Fiqh. Understandably, that's the reality, because that's what happens when you're specializing, okay? You all study, but the level of study, the degree, and that's at the undergraduate level. Then I went on and did a master's. And if I did a master's in hadith, which I could have done, I chose not to, then you would go into a whole different area. And while I'm doing that master's, I'm not studying fiqh or theology or whatever. I would have only done hadith. What's going to happen? My only knowledge of fiqh is going to be what I did at the undergraduate level. You understand? That's what happens when you come and specialize. So you need to understand, when you meet a scholar, find out their background. What did they study? What are they known for? What did their peers say about them? Anyway, so where was I? I told you I'm going to get lost, now I'm lost. We talked about this yesterday. Very good. Okay, khalas. How are you guys feeling? Good? So far so good? Okay, Jayyid. Now, let us now move on to some reasons about where and why there are differences in the overall philosophies of approaching fiqh. Understand, I just gave you 5 sciences. And I explained to you every one of these sciences you can spend, no exaggeration, a lifetime specializing in, to the exclusion of the other, by the way. That's how advanced these are. And they are all under overall the rubric of fiqh. By the way, there's still others, but these are the 5 main sciences of fiqh, for example, right? They have nothing to do with hadith and aqeedah, they're all there. So, the interplay between these 5 sciences, how and when you're going to prioritize one over the other, is one of the main causes of differences in the philosophies of fiqh. And what truly frustrates many of us, and I'll be one of the most frustrated in this regard, is when people who haven't studied even an iota of anything feel themselves fully qualified to comment on those who have studied and give verdicts not on the actual fiqh, on the people who are talking about fiqh, and dismiss an entire scholarship based upon their own narrow-minded understandings of 5 minutes or 10 minutes of study. And that's why you need to understand at your level, I'm not trying to be patronizing, but at my level of medical knowledge, I'm not a medical doctor, your level, when you haven't studied advanced fiqh, is you must find the faqih you trust. That's what you need to do. My whole talk today is to give you some tools with which you can judge how you can find that person. That's my goal, okay? Because in the end of the day, guys, bluntly, there is no alternative to taqleed, blind following. Either you study or you blindly follow. There is no third alternative, right? And my point to you, you need to know who to blindly follow. That's the whole purpose of today's 2-hour talk. You need to have some, so you all know the basics of medicine, right? You all know, you walk into a doctor's office, you look at where did he study from, you look at overall the reputation, you have a sense of how you judge, right? We're not going to go to some quack doctor who's, practicing medicine, like an alternative philosophy medicine, right? You know, the Bush doctors back in the day. We're not going to find somebody who's selling you quack medicine. You know, it's understood, this is person, so you have an idea of how to judge a doctor. You have an idea of how to judge an architect. I want you to have understanding, how do we judge fuqaha? How do we understand where these people are coming from? And one of the main points of contention is how one extrapolates from the text to the context. How one goes from a past precedent to a modern notion. How literal does one want to be versus how maqasidi does one want to be, right? How much do you want to take a ruling and then that is known and then extrapolate it to all the unknowns versus take a ruling that is known and say, okay, that's a known ruling, but are there exceptions? Can we find areas where that ruling will not apply? And I know I'm losing some of you, so I'm going to take a step back and go back to the seerah and tell you one of the most important incidents from the seerah that every one of you should be intimately familiar with to understand the diversity of fiqh. This is one of the most important incidents from the seerah to teach us from the beginning, minds are different. From the beginning, how you perceive the text varies based on who you are and your own understanding of the context. And that incident is the famous incident of Banu Qurayza and praying Asr in Banu Qurayza. I will pause here for a while and spend a few minutes because this is very useful knowledge for all of you. And then I'm going to come back to the overall philosophy. What happened? Banu Qurayza took place after the trench, the Battle of Trench, one of the most traumatic times. 30 days of no food, no water, 30 days of starvation. The Sahaba thought that that's it, khalas, we might even die. Allah says in the Quran, وَتَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ الظُّنُونَ, you began to have evil thoughts. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously intervened and a thunderstorm came, not a thunderstorm, a sandstorm came and routed the Confederates. You guys all know the Battle of Ahzab, I hope, inshallah, right? Okay, after 1 month, everybody wanted to do what? After 1 month of standing at the battlefield, what do you want to do? Huh? Go back home, take a shower, relax, be with the kids. For 1 month they were in the front. And the women and children were literally barricaded in a fortress inside of Medina. That's how dangerous the situation was. Fajr, they wake up, everybody's gone. Meaning the Confederates, Alhamdulillah, let's go back home. Let's have some, fun time. Let's get some burgers and snacks. Obviously not burgers and snacks, but let's just, have a fun family day. Let's take a nice hot shower, everything. So they come back home. The Prophet takes his armor off, and Jibreel comes to him. Maybe, realistically, maybe 10, 11 a.m. Jibreel comes to him and says, Ya Rasulullah, if you have taken your armor off, know that the angels have not taken their armors off. Why? Because we have to deal with the treachery of the Banu Qurayza. We have to deal, now again, if you don't know the seerah, one tribe betrayed internally, sent a secret message to the Quraysh and said, hey, we will fight from inside, you fight from outside, we'll get rid of the Muslims. In the most difficult time, they turned flip coat and they betrayed the trust of the Muslims. Okay, so the Banu Qurayza were of course a tribe of non-Muslim origin. We have to be, these days, we have to, this is not the time to get into that story. But anyway, I've explained that story in the seerah in a lot of detail. And so obviously the Banu Qurayza were treacherous in this regard. By the way, it's very clear, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. They were treated the way they were treated, not because of their ethnicity, but because they were treacherous. It's very simple. Has nothing to do with their background. They betrayed. And what do you do to traitors? At that time and place across the world, what do you do to them? So there's nothing to be embarrassed about. In any case, so the Prophet ﷺ, Jibreel said to him, you have to deal with the Banu Qurayza. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ put his armor back on. And everybody is going to come for dhuhr. So not everybody, but most of the Sahaba. So he prayed Salat al-Dhuhr in his armor. And everybody's like, wait, hold on a sec. What are you doing in your armor, Ya Rasulullah? So he said after the Salah, none of you should pray Asr except outside of the fortress of the Banu Qurayza. Spread the word, arm up again. Get back in to war mode. Get back in to everything. And I'll meet you over there. Do not pray Asr until you get to the Banu Qurayza. It's dhuhr time, let's say 1 p.m. Asr is going to be, let's say 4 p.m. Maghrib is going to be 5:30. That's the average time, 6 o'clock. Yeah, 5:45 p.m. Okay? So from 1 p.m. to 5:45, I need you to be in Banu Qurayza and we'll pray Asr over there before the sun sets. So far so clear, right? Well, after 30 days of being at the battlefront, it's not easy getting the word and explaining and spreading everybody around, and criers have to be sent and everything. So the Prophet ﷺ, with his immediate entourage, left after dhuhr, and he got to the Banu Qurayza fortress and camp, right, around Asr time. It takes like an hour to get there. Okay, on camel, on horse, it takes an hour to get there. So he got there and he prayed Asr, waiting for the rest of the Sahaba to come. So far so clear, right? Okay, now, by the time the news spreads in Medina, you can imagine, they haven't slept for 1 month properly. Many of them are completely out. Many of them need to explain what is going on. The time, it's like, what? Are you sure? Etc. By the time they leave the city, it's already Asr time. So they say, okay, we're not going to pray Asr now because we were told not to pray. So they set out, let's just say at 4:30 p.m., let's just say, okay? It takes 2 hours for them to come, waiting in the masjid. Everybody's, okay, should we wait for so-and-so? By the time they leave, they exit the city and they're on their way to Banu Qurayza. The Prophet ﷺ is where? Where is he? He's already there. So now you have maybe 100 Sahaba or more following the orders of the Prophet ﷺ, and they're marching. And as they're marching, they realize, Maghrib is 10 minutes away. and we have an hour left, or 40 minutes, however long they left, okay? Put yourself in that situation. This is very important to understand the diversity of fiqh, even at the time of the Sahaba. Maghrib is 45 minutes, I'm giving examples of it, we don't know exactly, 45 minutes away, and Maghrib is 10 minutes away, and the city is 45 minutes away, or the fortress is 45 minutes away. Now, the Prophet ﷺ clearly told us, don't pray Asr until you get there. What do we do now? Do we, because we were late, we weren't taking that into account, we didn't take a new context into account. Because when the Prophet ﷺ said this, the goal was very clear. What is the goal? Get your act together, hurry up, and I'll meet you there. Everybody understands that's the goal. Everybody understands that was what is intended. Well, sometimes what is intended isn't what happens. So now they're stuck. 10 minutes Maghrib, and they haven't prayed Asr. What do? They begin discussing amongst themselves. One group says, the Prophet ﷺ clearly said, don't pray Asr until you get to Banu Qurayza. So, if the sun sets, we haven't prayed Asr, what are we going to do? There's no problem. We're just going to follow what the Prophet ﷺ said. And we're going to delay Asr, make Asr qada, allow the time to seep out, and we're going to follow the literal, explicit command. Do not pray Asr until you get to Banu Qurayza. We're going to follow that. The other group said, well, hold on a sec. Guys, you know what he meant. I mean, obviously I'm paraphrasing. It's not exactly what they said, but you know what he meant. We were late. And obviously he'll understand. I mean, the goal is not praying Asr over there, the goal is to hurry up. And now that time is going, let's just quickly pray Asr, and then we'll explain to the Prophet, and he'll of course understand. That's the whole point. That's the goal of the Sharia here. And they had a bit of a debate. Neither side could convince the other. So guess what ended up happening? Half of them prayed, half of them didn't. Half of them were super literalist. That's what he said, that's what we're gonna do. And half of them were maqsadi, goal-oriented. Well, it's clear the Sharia intended something, and we're going to follow that. By the time they reached the Prophet ﷺ and they explained what had happened, he didn't rebuke either side, and he allowed it to pass. This is one of many examples, one of the most explicit examples of the reality that the words of the Sharia, the words of the Quran and Sunnah, they can be interpreted in different ways. Even in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not that simplistic. Because the other half said, well, obviously, we now have a clash between what the Quran says to pray at the proper time and what the Prophet ﷺ told us to pray in Banu Qurayza, and we clearly understand that priority should be given to the goal of the Sharia, which is to pray on time. And the purpose of the Prophet ﷺ telling us this was to hurry up. We didn't hurry up, so then we will delay Asr. We will not delay Asr, because we understand the goal here was not the Asr, but the hastiness. And the other group said, well, doesn't matter. If the Prophet ﷺ said it, he said it. And the Prophet ﷺ allowed the both of them. And the beautiful thing, he didn't say which one is right and wrong. Because from the beginning, there is some diversity of thought. And that's why some of the great tabi'un said, I love the fact that the Sahaba differed amongst themselves, fiqh-wise. Because it allowed for us the precedence of having some room in the Sharia.